Hi, my name's Stewart Lynch, and this is the first video in a new series and playlist on what's new after WWDC 23. So in this series we'll be featuring all the changes in iOS 17, macOS 14 Sonoma, watchOS 10, and Xcode 15. So what a better place to start than to show you the changes in the tool that we use to create our content, and that's Xcode 15. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. Now, I don't really have a starter project that would make much sense to you, so please just watch and perhaps test out what you learn in your own apps. Everything I show you should be applicable. Throughout the course of this video, I want to show you how I dig down into the documentation in some cases to learn more about those changes. But you must be sure you're running Xcode 15, and as of this recording of this video, I'm on beta 2. So be aware that some things may change. So let's just get started. As soon as WWDC 23's keynote was over, the first beta of Xcode 15 was released, and this year there are all sorts of quality of life improvements. As an iOS developer, you spend a lot of time in Xcode, so it's in your best interest to maximize your time and learn how you can best take advantage of its features. Now, I may not cover all of the new features in this video, as I'm still discovering them, but I do want to touch on the ones that I've started using immediately. First, though, it's important to know how to manage multiple copies of Xcode. If you're watching this video after it's out of beta, you may already have it, but if it's in beta, you'll want to make sure that you have the latest release version as well so that you can continue to work on your apps with that version. So if you're working with multiple versions of Xcode, as I often am, there's really, in my opinion, only one way to do this, and that is to use the open source Xcodes application. And you can see that in this website here. You can follow the download link to the GitHub page, and from there, the link for installing. And my recommendation is to install Homebrew on your computer and install it that way. Once it's installed, there is a check for update option in the file menu. Now, at the time of this video, I have the last Xcode 14 release as well as the first beta release. Now, there's a new beta that I have yet to install. The green checkbox besides this one means that this is the default version, and this is the one that Xcode Select is linked to. When I double-click on an Xcode project file, this will be the version that opens. But there's nothing stopping me, however, from changing the default or opening this version first and then open a project from within it, or right-click on a project file and choose Open In and choose whatever version of Xcode I want. Eventually, I'll be making Xcode 15 the default. In order to see this listing, you'll need to be signed into your developer account and grant access. On the Downloads tab for the data source, you can choose either Apple or the Xcode Releases site for the list of downloads. So if you don't see a current beta in the list, choose Apple. Now you can see in the Xcode list view here that you can install any version going way back. Installation is not only as easy as clicking on the Install button, but you'll also find that it is much faster in downloading and decompressing the archive, so you can get started pretty quickly. Make sure that you also routinely check for updates for Xcodes to make sure you've got the latest version installed. Let me speed up this video to right now to complete the download. Once it's been downloaded and expanded, you can open that version of Xcode by clicking on that Open button. You can also use Xcodes to remove no longer used copies of your Xcode versions. And this will remove the item to the trash, and you can delete it from there to empty the trash. So let's get started and see what there is that can make my life better. Let's take a look at this example I have here. Right now I'm only presenting images, and all of these images are here in this Assets catalog, as you can see. I also have two colors that I'll get to shortly. Now, if I go back to my content view here and change Swift Bird here on the first SwiftUI image view to remove the letter F, the image simply doesn't appear. I don't get a crash, it just doesn't appear. And the same is the case for this label if I can't find the name of the image that I've specified. In this second SwiftUI image, though, I'm trying to display an image from the Documents directory, and if it doesn't exist, I default to a UI image named SwiftBirds that's in my asset catalog. But with UIKit, this is optional, so I have to force unwrap it to get it to display. If I misspell it, like I can by removing a letter here, my preview crashes, and so would my app. Well, in iOS 17, things changed and we can now get symbols for assets in our asset catalog. So instead of presenting my image like this, let me cut out this entire view and its modifiers and repeat the process as I would do it now. This time, when I select an image, I get image resource, but this arrow here tells me that there is another constructor. And if I press the right arrow, I see I get both overloads, and the named one is the one that requires a string, which is what we used. But if I select this resource option, it's asking for an image resource type. And if I enter a period, well, lo and behold, I see the representations of all of my images in my asset catalog converted to camel case. And I can see two options, which indicates that we have two options for this particular overload. One is an image resource, but the other is a UI image, which will come in handy shortly. So let me just choose SwiftBirds option. Now I'll need to add my modifiers back now. And this is new as well. When I start to add modifiers, Xcode is now aware more of the context. So when I enter a period, it presents to me at the top of the list the kind of modifiers that it thinks it most likely applies to this particular view. So, for example, resizable. And then when I try again with another period, resizable is no longer that option, but aspect ratio seems like a good choice here. So we can choose it and select fit. This is now a type-safe view. Now let's look at this label view. This is the constructor that requires a string for the label title and a string for the name of the image asset. Let me comment this out and create another one. Well, this is the one that we used, but you see, as well as a string, when I expand my choices by pressing the right arrow on my keyboard, I get an image resource type, which is that asset symbol. So let's enter iOS 17 as my title, and then access all my image resources in my asset catalog by pressing a period, and I'll choose the iOS 17 small. For this UI image, we're using a string and we're force unwrapping. Well, it turns out that instead of using a label named, we can use a resource and then choose an image resource symbol from our asset catalog. So I'll choose SwiftBirds. And because we're using an image resource generated by Xcode, we no longer need to force unwrap. That's great. Well, like our image assets, iOS 17 does the same thing for colors. And remember, as you can see, I've got a Swift blue color and a Swift orange color. So for this first image, let me just change the rendering mode to template. Now that it's a template image, I can apply a foreground color to the image. And I can apply any color I want. So let me just choose a built-in color of orange using that dot notation. Well, unfortunately, this is not the Swift color of orange, and I want to use my asset version of Swift orange. And in the past, we would have had to enter that as a string using the color view constructor, like this. Well, now in Xcode 15 and iOS 17, color assets like image assets are provided with a symbol, so we can remove the entire instance of the color. And because it's a foreground color that it's expecting a color, we'll just enter the period and be presented with all of my color assets and the built-in ones like orange, but I'll choose Swift orange. And then if I want, I can easily change this color to, say, Swift blue. Moving on, before Xcode 15, if we wanted to get a quick way to find a number of options available to perform on content, we could command click. And this is what we saw in Xcode 14 and earlier. Now, however, if I command click, it does something entirely different, and I'll get to that shortly. This is good though, because I could never remember if it was Option click, Command click, or some other combination. Right now, then I can right click and get all of those actions, plus the options that were available before when you right clicked. But there's also another really nice addition to Xcode. Let's say, for example, you have some code that looks like this, where we have a struct with an initializer and a static property called family that's an instance of this person struct. That family property is not easy to read, and it would be nicer if we could separate each of the arguments out on a separate line and split up that array of children. Now, previously I'd do something like this, where I would use the Control click with my mouse after each opening parentheses and bracket, and then again before each closing one to create multiple cursors, and then hit return to separate my code out. That's 8 clicks. And then I'd often do it again after each comma to separate out each individual property. That's another 5 control clicks. Well, now there's an option to pretty much do this automatically. So let me revert back and move this code up by adding some blank lines. Now in Xcode 15, we can select a line of code, and then from the Editor menu and the Structure menu, there's an option to format to multiple lines. And notice that there's also a keyboard shortcut of Control-M here. So when I select this option from the menu, I get exactly what took me all those clicks to do. So let me just scroll up to this initializer here then and select it. And this time, I'll just use that keyboard shortcut of Control-M. So let's just finish this part up here by going back to Content View, and I'm going to Command click on the VStack, and now I see that it presents to me a definition and the initializer for VStack. That's pretty handy to see that, and if I click on any one of these, it takes me to the source code. Another great addition for those of us who like to keep our hands on the keyboard when coding is the introduction of a quick action shortcut. By invoking the key commands Command-Shift-A, a lot of actions are presented to you. Now this is only a subset of all of the actions available, and are some suggestions, but not all are applicable. These actions are all menu options, and you'll see the menu name below, and if there is a current keyboard shortcut, it displays it as well. Now, for example, I never remember the built-in keyboard shortcut for showing and hiding the canvas on the right. So if I do a Command-Shift-A and then start typing the canvas, the quick actions filter, and I discover all sorts of things. Well, the first item in the list is simply to show or hide it. So let me do that again to bring it back. If I filter on Canvas once more, I see that there are a number of other options that I wasn't even aware of. Now these options are always available if I want to use menus, but now most, if not all menu items are available from this quick action shortcut. So this makes things much more discoverable, and I'll be using this a lot. Well, while we're here on this view, let's look at this canvas. And we know that it's generated by a preview provider in our view. Well, in iOS 17, this has become much simpler by using a preview Swift macro. The pound or hashtag preview is all you need now to create a preview. And in 90% of the cases, this will meet your needs, and it supports previews for UIKit as well. So if I want to create a second preview, all I have to do is use the preview macro hashtag, and there, within the trailing closure, type in the name of the view that you want to preview. So let me use the same one. Now I have two, and it's confusing though because we have both the same name. If I option click on the macro, we'll see that the initializer here allows us to add an optional title. And it's nil by default, that's why we didn't use one. But let's add one, and I'm going to call it landscape, and I'll do that on the second preview. This is great, but it doesn't show us the device in landscape mode. Let me option click once more and drill down into the documentation. And it's here that we see an initializer for the macro that is displayed, but notice that there are more options here. So let me select the next one, and I'll see that it has an additional parameter that is a preview trait. So what's a preview trait? Well, I can drill down on that, and we see that we have a number of options for orientation. One of them is landscape left. So let me return now then to our content view and the preview provider and add a traits property and choose .landscape left. Now I've not been able to find a way to actually change the device that the preview is showing programmatically like we used to with the old preview provider. But we now have the option to change the device quickly for all previews without having to change our build target. So here I'm choosing an iPad Air. So when we're building widgets, we can specify the size we want to display, as well as provide a timeline provider to see all versions over a timeline. I'll likely be doing a video on widgets in the new interactive widget later on in this year, so stay tuned for that video. And I'll cover all the new widget preview options there. Now we've already seen how code completion is context aware when we were applying modifiers earlier, but there's more. Let me create a new file, and I'm going to call it API service. And now when I create a class within this new file, as soon as I start typing A, I see that code completion is allowing me to see the name of that particular file because it's assuming that that's what I want to name my class as well. That's great. If I return to my content view now, I want to add a frame to this blue Swiftbird image. And when I type .frame, I see that there is that arrow on the right that's indicating that there are multiple initializers for a frame. Because there are so many parameters and many of them are optional or have default values. If I press that right arrow key on my keyboard, all of them are separated out for me, giving me all of the possible options. When I get to the bottom of that, I see the other frame initializer that includes my minimum, maximum, and ideal options, and I can expand it as well too, and now I get a list of all of the options for frame. Let me just go back up to the top, and the one that I want to choose is just the frame with a width only, and I can specify 200. And because my image is resizable and scaled with an aspect ratio of fit, everything just is going to fit nicely. There are some new features as well that have been added this year, and one of the most powerful is the new Bookmarks feature. You can place your cursor anywhere within a file and right-click, and you'll have two options to set a bookmark. I can choose to bookmark a file at a specific line number or the file itself. So let's bookmark this line here for this image path. And I'm going to add a description here like refactor to another constants file. Let me also just add a bookmark to the file itself this time, and you'll see that no bookmark icon appears within the file. Let me go to another file, say this API service file, and add a bookmark right here in the class, and leave a note to myself that it needs to be completed. Now in the navigator on the left-hand side, you'll see this new Bookmarks navigation tab. When I tap here, I see those three bookmarks. Well, we can also group bookmarks. So for example, I could create a folder called action items. And those two action item bookmarks that I've had, I can drag into that folder and they become part of that grouping. For any of these bookmarks, I can tap on any of them and it'll take me directly to that particular location. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what the benefit of a bookmark is without a line number reference. And if you want to remove a bookmark, I can simply just right-click on it and choose Delete Bookmark. In my other cases here, I can complete these tasks and remove them. But if I want to maintain a checklist, say, to help me out with commits to know what I've done since my last commit, I can check them off as completed. And then only after I've performed a commit, using all those ones that have been checked off as my description, I can then delete those bookmarks. And another very powerful feature of bookmarks is safe searches. For example, I created a code snippet using the letters CBU that will leave me a comment with a preface check beta update. So as I'm working through different betas on Xcode 15 and I run into issues that I think may be bugs that are going to be fixed later, I can add a comment to the section that I've used my workaround. So for example, I can even note like this. Well, let me go to another file and add another one, like here. So now with each release, I want to make sure that I check out these items. So what I've done in the past is perform a search on the string check beta item like this, and it's going to give me a listing of all of those occurrences. Well, now I can right-click on any one of those search hits and choose to bookmark it. In the Bookmarks Navigator now I see that I have that search permanently there. And clicking on any one of them will take me to that comment. Well, what if I add a new check beta update comment somewhere? Like here too in my entry point. If I return to the Bookmarks Navigator, it hasn't been added. But all I have to do is just tap this refresh button and it picks it up and lists it. Another great feature of Xcode 15 is conditional configuration. So if you're developing apps that have targets of multiple platforms, you'll see code that looks like this, where you use the conditional if-else statements to provide code based on the target OS. This is a view from a sample app that I created for Code with Chris, and it's this jokes view that I will use for both a Mac target but also an iOS target. Now the pasteboard for a Mac uses NS pasteboard, while for iPhone it is UI pasteboard, and what is required to copy is different on both. So in this view here, you can see my target is the iOS app, but you see that the code for macOS is dimmed out. If I change the scheme to macOS, the reverse happens. The iOS code is dimmed out and the macOS code is active. This is really nice. Now finally, one last thing I want to show you is the new and improved source control that is built into Xcode 15. You may have noticed that I have this file under source control. Well, in the previous builds of Xcode, there was a source control menu, and though powerful enough for simple tasks, it was still quite limited for Git power users. Now in Xcode 15, the menu has been changed to integrate, and as well as the previous options, we now have the ability to stage and unstage our current changes for a particular file for all changes. If I go to Commit Now, I can take a look at all changes and drill down to a particular file where I can see what those changes are. None of these changes have been staged yet, however. Look for a video later in this series where I'll go over all of these different icons and what they mean and do a little bit more in-depth of using Xcode as my source control. Right now, what I can do is stage all changes before I commit. Now, if I wanted to hold back on one piece of code, I can unstage it right here. Now let me add a comment, and I'll perform my commit. After the commit, you see that we only have one modified file with changes. And you can see that it is unstaged. Back in the project manager then, that's the only one showing with the modified icon. Now in this view, I can stage my change code by right-clicking and choosing Stage, and it will stage that code. Checking back the source control navigator, I can see that I no longer have any unstaged changes, so that it has been staged. Now all I'd have to do is add a comment and commit my changes. Well, I hope that this has given you an appreciation on the changes and power of Xcode 15. And I'm looking forward to diving into all of the new APIs and sharing my discoveries with you over the next few months. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. This helps drive traffic to my channel and provides me with encouragement for continuing to create these kinds of videos. So be sure to subscribe as well so you get notified when new videos are released. Thanks for watching.